Hello and welcome back to Startups, People and Equity. This is a space where we discuss topics, related to startups, people and equity. We hope that you will enjoy listening to today's episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Let's dive straight in.
Huge pleasure to welcome Christoffer Herheim to the podcast. Chris went straight from a top Norwegian business school into employee equity management at Equitex back in 2012. Whilst some of us were wondering if investment banking, psychology, or orange picking was the right path with an accounting and finance degree, Chris was neck deep in helping some of the largest companies in the Nordics with their employee share plans. After about 6 years, he took his learnings and started his own company, which was first a service firm and later became Optio Incentives, the cap table management software that we know today. They have fully bootstrapped until early this year, which meant that you went from 0 to 60 employees fully self-funded, which is a huge feat, and we'll definitely ask you about that. And you decided to take on a smaller round Q1 early this year. And we'll surely speak about the timing and all of that with regards to that raise in a bit as well. When not CEOing at Optio, Chris competes with the natural predators of salmon to bring home dinner to his family from the Norwegian wilderness. In brackets, the origin of this joke was that the first time we chatted, you were in the car on the way to fishing salmon, I think with the chairman of Optio or something similar to that.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much for giving us a bit of your time, and can't wait to dive into the conversation. Is there anything that you would add to my intro?
I think it's great. The only thing is, like, when I jumped into that company, it was also a startup in a way. So because it wasn't really Equitex yet, I joined into a company that was called EquityPeople. I was not one of the founders, but early, it wasn't 10 employees yet, and kind of came into a very, very early stage company, which at that point of time was a very strange thing to do in a way, because all my friends jumped into like McKinsey, BCG, EY, PwC, and so, and I went into a startup that did equity incentives. Like, what are you doing here?
Why did you do that?
Yeah. Now, why I did it is because of that. You could say I was actually introduced to a really, really, I call it exciting CEO in that company. This was 1 year before I was done with my master's, so I wasn't really prepared to apply for a job or so. So I didn't really take a position on where I wanted to go. But I was convinced and impressed with what they wanted to do and the plans, and I kind of got a bit blown away by the ability to come in straight from school and really make an impact, and get a lot of responsibility, no safety net, just dive into it. And I think that was really, really cool.
Did you experience yourself entrepreneurial before this decision, or was this like coming without any pretext?
I think personality-wise, my mom and dad tell some stories about when I was gathering all the even smaller kids in my street and send them around to sell stuff that we have made, and I kind of had the smallest ones go and selling because they were even cuter than I were, and then they got more money, and then we kind of split the money. So I think like even from then it was something. And during my my education as well, we started up a couple of call it like projects or unions that kind of are living today still. So I think I've always liked to kind of go out and make new paths and so out of stuff. Even not really thinking about it, but it kind of just happens because you get a bit like impatient on why can't we do it like this, and then you just do it yourself in a way. Yeah.
I just realized that it would be a very different discussion if you stayed in your first business. Maybe you wouldn't be in such a nice office if you were still sending kids around to sell stuff.
Definitely. I think it would have been a bit, perhaps a bit negative now, actually. Yeah.
When you started at Accurate Equity, was that the first time you heard of equity?
Yeah, I'd say so. So for me, like options, I did, of course, do some Black and Scholes and some valuations of options at school. but that wasn't related at least to employee incentives. So I knew what an option was like technically, but more as a financial instrument. And then equity incentives. I think I don't. I think I didn't really knew it existed. But I kind of liked. I remember one of the talks I had when they kind of said that it's a way of making sure that not only the owners get rich, also the ones that are pulling a lot of the weight. I kind of liked that part of it. And then after digging a bit more into it, like kind of also adding the psychology part of it, how much more motivated you actually are, how much more kind of engaged you would be. And of course, I like the finance part of it as well, which is like kind of how will it affect your P&L? How can we evaluate it? So like it is a way of really testing yourself because it's multi-disciplines into something. So I think that's the stuff that I kind of fell in love with quite early. Yeah.
And what was then the story within Accurate Equity and then Equitex and then Optio Incentives? How did you get through these stages?
Yeah, I can take the medium long one because the long one will be too long and the short one will be very short. But the name of the company when I started was Norse Solutions. In 2012, we changed name to Accurate Equity because we wanted to be a bit more international because we already had quite a lot of international clients at that point of time. Bear in mind that at this point, we basically, we did something else as well, but we focused on accounting. And then Accurate Equity grew quite well. We got like close to 50% of the listed Norwegian clients. We worked with Spotify. We worked with BNP Paribas. We worked with Deutsche Bank. It was cool, really cool actually. And I got to kind of challenge myself a lot and learn so much. In 2015, there was a private equity company from UK that acquired Accurate Equity, which was the company that I worked for. And they also acquired UBS's share admin. So UBS had share admin and they carved it out from UBS. And those two companies together formed Equitex. So Accurate Equity that I was a part of was the smaller part of it. UBS setup was the bigger part of it. They had transactions and all that sort of stuff, right? So that was kind of that transaction and the change. And I stayed on board about a year following that transaction. Still kind of learned a lot, but I kind of felt that at that point of time, it was decisions more taken from Zurich. Strategy was a bit unclear in my mind. Like, do we want to go with the smaller companies, the bigger companies? What do we want to be? And I felt it changed a bit. Obviously, I can't say it was wrong or right, but in my point of view and from where I kind of sat, it wasn't that interesting anymore. So I left in 2016. No intention of working with equity incentives anymore, because then I felt that I know so much about equity incentives that regardless of my next job, I will not learn anything else that I will benefit in that job. So I kind of felt now I'll do something else. But back to like kind of always trying to start new stuff. We started a company, a software company that did, or that still do actually, hedging and hedge accounting for mainly power producers. So kind of, okay, you want to hedge your future power production and the income, and then you enter that. So we kind of paired it, and it's also an accounting system. Again, still alive today. I also started a carpenting company because I met a nice carpenter at home. He had like terrible working situation, so we made him leave, and we started the company around him. That company also actually grew to about 20-25 employees, but I wasn't a carpenter and I didn't enjoy it so much, and I was bad at it as well. So we ended up not doing so well. But again, a really nice experience. After working with a carpenting company, you get to appreciate recurring revenue quite well to make that one short. Yeah.
Do you still have all your fingers?
Yeah, definitely. I have.
Well done.
Yeah.
But it's like, you weren't so bad.
Not so bad. But it's like it's also I didn't do so much carpeting, but the challenge is like, okay, you are supposed to mount, or your company is supposed to mount bathroom panels on 186 bathrooms in a big building. Okay, you have 20 people waiting 8 o'clock in the morning. Now the material is supposed to come. And then 10 minutes to 8, you get a phone saying that it's 3 weeks delayed. And then what do you do with your 20 people? Okay, you're also responsible of mounting these things and the plumbers and the electricians that are supposed to do stuff after you, they also get the challenge, right? And this is like something that it's so much moving parts and so much unpredictability in this business that I admire the ones that still like it after being there for quite a while.
And then we arrive onto Optio, I guess.
Yeah, correct. So during that period here, we started a few other companies. I got a good friend of mine to leave his job as well. In order to make these different companies work, we started actually a company that was called Optio Partners. Optio Partners have nothing to do with Optio sounding like options. Optio is kind of a co-soldier, the first soldier in kind of an army, but it's not the lead soldier. It's a good helper. So that's what we wanted to be. We wanted to be partners that helped other companies grow quite well, which was like, I was not the lead carpenter and I was not the lead developer in this other company as well, but kind of came with quite a lot of other stuff. And I was also like a CEO in a COO in a crypto company that did an ICO on Ethereum, just to kind of spread myself too thin and do too much strange stuff at the same time. But it was fun and learning a lot. During this period here, and now I come back to the equity incentive part, quite a few of the clients that I used to work with while I was in Accurate Equity / Equatex were asking me a lot of questions about stuff that, call it the new company, did not really want to answer, or it wasn't a part of the strategy. So it was a gap in terms of holding hands a bit closer, pretty similar to what you do today. So I helped a lot of the companies on identifying the right incentive programs. I helped the boards, the compensation committees, worked with the owners to kind of land, and worked with the communication with no software. This was fun. I liked it a lot and got to know a lot of great people. As a development of this in 2018 early, some of these people, some of these companies, which was all listed big companies, asked me questions about like, okay, the existing offering that we feel that are in the market is kind of lacking a bit of what we kind of want. And that gave us the idea of, let's try to see if we could pivot this over to a software company where we build a software that solves this. Extremely or low ambitions in the company from the start, because we didn't really think it was able to kind of get in. And that's perhaps a bit of the reason why what we will talk a bit about later with the bootstrapping as well, because we didn't really think this will change the world. It was more like, this is a need and we see it, let's solve it. And then we gradually started to kind of work with Optio, and I think we sold the first contract based on a PowerPoint, a company that committed to a 3-year software deal, and we didn't have anything. So it's just show that there's a need if we manage to do what we want here. Yeah.
So let's get into it. Bootstrapping. How did it go? What were the challenges? What are the benefits?
Yeah. Oh, that's an entire podcast episode. Yeah. No, but again, it started a bit based on our ambition level. We didn't really think that this could be a company worldwide that do everything on share incentives. We of course knew share works quite well. We knew computer share. We had quite a good grasp of the competition area. So and the intention was not to kind of embark on beating them at that point of time. So we did some consulting. We were able at that point of time to, let's say, invoice on average at like 250 euros an hour or so. And we didn't take out so much salary. So of course, by doing that, we managed to get our CTO on board. We managed to split the revenue that we got in evenly, so that we didn't really need to raise. And the money was like 90% at the start consultancy, 10% software. Which was a software we didn't have. So it's but still it was software revenue. And then as we grew, we managed to earn more and more on the software part. We also had some transactional revenue where we cooperated with a Norwegian bank, so that helped on the listed environment to do what we call a cashless exercise on options, which is basically just that loaning money to the ones that want to exercise options, take the shares, sell it in the market, paying back the money to the participants, or some shares if they want to keep some of the shares. And that's also a service that we developed that gave us like a revenue split. So those things together managed the revenue to grow. So we had like a 100% year-on-year growth in revenue. So in euros, it was like 0, 250,000, 500,000, 1 million, and then 2 millions. So that was kind of the growth based on these things. And based on that, again, we were very close on the spreadsheets to make sure that we didn't spend more than what we had. With the growth, we could, of course, front load a bit because we invoiced the software revenue a bit in advance. So we were very careful on these things, and then could gradually kind of do it faster. And I think like the advantages of doing it like this is that you are very cautious. You don't spend on with a lot of money, a lot of people running around with not so close plan. You also see very fast what works and not, because you're so close onto it, and you don't have 10 different things happening at the same time. The disadvantage, obviously, we could have grown faster if we did it like this. And it's always like what's smart and what not. I'm not the one to give the right answer, but it worked for us at least. Yeah.
How many times did you consider raising? Like, was that always in the back of your mind, or did you kind of exclude that as an option?
That's a good question. Honestly, no, we didn't think about it. So it was not a clear kind of strategy on we do this without raising. Because I think from the start, we weren't thinking that this could be what it ended up being. So for us, it was more like kind of, okay, we built the company, and we also had the other companies, right? So it was other stuff that we did.
Yeah.
So I think, I think that's, and it was only like when we saw that, it's growing at this speed, people are asking us for more. We see that even in the new markets, it's growing. Then we kind of realized that, okay, it's actually possible to grow this faster. We could do it more. We could do more in parallel, but that will cost us more money than what we were able to have. And that's when we kind of realized that, okay, now it's about time. I also think it's important to back to the carpenting part. When you're doing like what's it called? When you want to make the foundation of something in your house or so, you need this shell or this kind of surroundings before you put the concrete up in it. I think like we needed to build this this kind of frame around first, and then we were able to control the cement or the concrete that we would put up in it, and that took us some time. I don't think we would have managed to grow well with 10 million euros year 1 or 2. Again, that was us, but personally, I don't think that would have ended up so much better.
Very interesting to hear that. Essentially, what's going to stay with me in my mind is it's good for the business to start with a shell, and this shell is not full of money, but it's full of ingenuity and creativity and making sure you do the right things for your spreadsheet and for the client. But then there comes a point where is it about existence or is it about ambition? You have different reasons to raise money. You can either want to take over the world, or there's another one, maybe they're going to overcome you if you don't take on that growth capital. Like, what was your thought?
Yeah, I'd say also a good question. It's easy to answer like 50-50 on that one. Because it's like for us, we saw that, of course, there are movements in the market. We can't be blue-eyed and thinking that nothing will affect us, whatever we do. So we need to think about that, seeing that others are doing it differently. So that was important. On the other side, it was also seeing that when we notice that clients are not leaving us, we barely have no churn. When we also notice that there's a demand, and we see that it's actually quite easy to sell, that's kind of a wrong word, but we're able to get some traction in other markets as well. You think that, okay, we can't be too slow also to actually get our ambitions out there, because the ambitions were suddenly high. It used to be low. So I think it's a 50-50, and both very important to kind of bear in mind. And I think that's also a bit of the advantages with the bootstrapping part. You become very aware about everything, because you kind of again, the difficult part is that you sleep bad. But on the other side, you're very like, okay, this movement here. Okay, do we have money here? Yes, we need this. Oh, this is not working. Oh, we need to cut this. You get very, very, very hands on, and the Fingerspitzgefühl gets very close in a way. Yeah.
I'm wondering who were the people that were with you on this journey. We mentioned someone that you managed to convince to quit, and then we mentioned the CTO. Can you talk us through a little bit about the core team and the founding team?
Yeah. definitely. So I'd say the most important person, at least like looking now and looking back, was Mats, co-founder from start. I met him in the Accurate Equity company. So he was not like early, but he came in a year before I left. But he came in to kind of do sales globally in that company. And then that company again was acquired and merged. So he was a bit demotivated because he wanted to kind of take Norway to the world, and then suddenly the world came and took Norway. So he was stuck a bit like versus what he wanted to do. So I was a bit demotivated in terms of didn't really feel I managed to kind of challenge myself anymore the last year, and he was a bit demotivated, feeling that it wasn't really what he signed up for. We talked a lot and we discussed a lot, not about starting a company like this, but everything else. We became close friends. And then after, he was not a part of kind of the consultancy company from start, but after kind of when we saw that there was a need here, I started to talk with him. And of course, we liaised with lawyers and made sure that we didn't do anything wrong or so. But him coming in with very experienced and good backgrounds from kind of enterprise sales, since we kind of focused on listed companies, that was really great. And also like a good guy, really made for early stage in the company, but still able to do enterprise. I think that mix is also important. So he was and still the most important. We also got our really great startup CTO. He was actually renting the office that we took over. That company that he worked with was bankrupt, didn't really go the right way. We took over the office, including the old furnitures and the CTO. So that was how we kind of met.
The old furniture.
Yeah, him and a couch. That was yeah. And he was like, he's not working in Optio anymore, but super important. Kind of a one-man army. And bootstrapping as well. Like he was the only developer in Optio the first 2 years we built software almost. So he was front end, back end, DevOps, infrastructure. We were sitting around the same table solving the problems together regardless. So he knew what he knew, Mats what he knew, and me what I did. So, and we also had this friend of mine that was a part of it in the early stage. I also quit quite early, which was fine because it wasn't a match. And we also have a guy that was an intern with the finance masters at that point of time. So we considered him co-founder as well. He quit, but he quit because of that he wanted to be a coder. And now that he has completed his coding experience, he's now working with us again. So now he's not a finance guy now, but he has completed a 2.5 year coding between. But it's a great mix for us because he knows all the stuff on finance and how it works, and then now he's suddenly doing coding. So it's a good mix as well.
Beautiful. Slightly divorcing our main kind of conversation angle, but what are your feelings with regards to employee option schemes where employees are not allowed to leave with equity? You mentioned a couple of churns and think about them very positively, which I think is the right way to approach it. Not asking if they left with equity, but in general, what are your thoughts around that topic?
I think it's extremely company and strategy dependent. I have seen some cases. Let's say it's a cancer research medicine company. That's actually a case I've seen. They do stages of research. You get an option, which kind of or options that vests over 1 and 2 and 3 years. But their stages of exploration is 2, 3, 4 years, just to kind of say something like that. They are listed on the stock exchange, or could be listed on the stock exchange. And then you get cases when you do, stage 1 in your research. Boom, the market takes off because you're on track to something huge. But you're not done because you don't have anything to sell. Stage 2, still boom. Wow, company is suddenly worth 150 million euros, right? And then 2/3 of his options or her options are vested. And she leaves, and sell the shares because it's listed. So it's actually liquidity there, gets rich. That was a lead research person. Company do not manage to do well in research level 4. But these people get rich. So this is like the edge case. But I think it's important to bear in mind, what do you want to achieve as a company? What is the journey that you're on? And how does that align with your vesting structure? So generally, I have nothing against like, okay, great investing and that you're able to kind of take something off the and kind of provide some liquidity during the race or so. But you need to consider how it affects your strategy and where you are. If it's a robust company on target, people are on a lower salary because of these things. You could look at it as like a salary compensation part. If that's the case, providing some liquidity at an earlier stage and possible to kind of get off, even if you're still there or not, more fair. So yeah.
It's very interesting to hear this exact example, because sometimes people say our strategy is long tenure, which isn't a good enough strategy. It needs to have an actual reason why someone is impactful in the long tenure and less impactful in the short tenure, which is what you usually then end up seeing in a blog post. This is why we have backloaded vesting, and now all of a sudden more founders want to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like this design part, when you kind of what you work with now, right? When you kind of need to understand where are you in your journey as a company, what do you want to achieve, what's the timelines, what's the various scenarios, like a high growth case, a mid case, a bad case, and to kind of make something robust that kind of makes sure that this is something that really serves the purpose, and you think about the various scenarios here. That's also why it's not so simple to say like, this is the golden program, everyone should use this. We can give it a shot, and I sometimes like giving it a shot because I think it's fun. But we all know that you need to ask those questions to get a right program.
Exactly. Can I ask one about your early stages of Optio incentives? Because you mentioned that you went a little bit in the opposite direction than comparable companies, and I wanted to hear more about that.
So the early stage of Optio, how we did it, or the equity journey that we did there, or
I think the approach that you had to the market.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And then
Yeah. Right. So at that point of time, to be honest, I did not know anything about the private market. I'm exaggerating a bit, but not so much. And what I knew then was like, okay, what are the challenges that listed companies have with equity compensation? That is, there are people globally that hold shares and can become shareholders in a company. That is difficult to some extent. You need to know about that. You need to know about all the questions that the auditors will ask, because that's often super difficult. If you include people moving from a country to country between dimensions, you want to know what do actually a hair dryer cost if you work in Electrolux. And there's actually option costs related to one hair dryer. Then you need to allocate it into like departments and even down to products. And that's the world that I kind of came from, right? So and that's also what we started with. So making a very robust way of calculating the costs, making sure that we cover all the costs elements, even if you move the social security parts, the dilution parts, the deferred tax, everything that comes with this, which is difficult, we kind of automated from start. And of course, then we needed to sell what we had, which was basically to listed companies or companies that wanted to go IPO that needed this. In addition, it was like this liquidity part. So if you're listed and you have options, you may not be that you have the strike price and the money to cover the taxes, right? So then we also made a setup that did that, dependent on that it was a market. So we did that very, very early as well, together with banks, and ensured it was possible to bridge fund this short-term loan, in a way you can call it, for the strike price, and kind of do stuff in the market. And also here, making sure that you are compliant, because there's primary insider notifications that have to be done. There's kind of black periods. There's stuff here when you're in a listed environment that the software developed, or we did from start. Our first 40 clients were listed, and that's kind of where we focused. And we did not have a cap table at that point of time, because if you are listed, you don't need, because the cap table change every second, and with trades on the stock exchange, so it wouldn't make any sense to make. And then from there on, we developed, of course, an employee front end with a nice way of explaining what's your value. We linked up to the stock exchange, making sure you always saw, we simulated like kind of values, how it can develop, right? And we made like a backend where it's possible to grant shares and or grant options, and to make sure that these things are right. All these things are relevant for also the private market. And then we saw that some of the smaller listed companies, or listed companies we had, their CFOs or other admins were talking to people in the kind of bigger non-listed environment. And then we started to get some attention from super exciting, fast-growing, ambitious companies that was non-listed. And then we listened to them at the way we had been working very closely with our listed clients. And we found out a few things that we needed to develop in order to make them happy. And that's when we kind of came on like, okay, we need to build a cap table. The cap table needs to support all sorts of preference shares. We need to make sure that it's possible to simulate what happens in an exit scenario. We need to make sure that we cover convertibles and all these things. And the companies that we work together with here are, I'd say, still very demanding and advanced, right? They are bigger than most of the listed companies we have. And by doing that, we kind of managed to from start have something that was quite complex. That we've always worked with a mindset of how can we make it super simple to use, look simple, but if you open the dash, it should be a lot of fancy stuff in the engine below, but the users don't need to think about that.
My impression from that journey is you put these two numbers out there earlier on in the conversation, 90-10. That was the split between service and product revenue early on. It sounds like it was a very gradual shift towards where you are today, which is perhaps the reverse, but maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there.
Very, very correct. So this has been like a graph which has been kind of developed quite similarly to our growth graph in a way, where as we have been growing in revenue, our call it like consultancy / non-recurring revenue part has been still. So obviously now, it's closer to 90-10, the other way around. While the 10 that we have now is more on transactional revenue and some implementation fees or so, things that we don't really want to focus too much on because now we are a different company. So the times that we still have the insights and the domain know-how that we had before, but it's more like something we ideally we would work with other good advisors and we could kind of contribute with what we know where it's relevant to kind of form a good partnership. But the ideal setup here is that people that are closer and know more about these than us now are doing this part while we ensure that it's a perfect bridge over to the administration part of it, and also that continuously, like the companies are getting the exact support that they need and deserve.
When we talk about the service part, and then we talk about the publicly listed companies, to me, what that leads to is a question that all late-stage scale-ups have. Well, how do I get ready to be listed when it comes to equity options? What would you say? You don't have to go into detail, but even just demystifying a little bit, I think would help any CPO, CFO that hasn't done it before.
Yeah. I think like the first step is to kind of have order in your stuff. That kind of goes without saying, but there's so often that you come into like an IPO process and then you haven't really control of your previous share splits and the prices and the time it was granted and so. And then you get into then the road is long to kind of do that. So I'd say as soon as possible, long before ideally you think IPO ready, try to make sure that you have a good history of your splits, of your timing, of the share price that grants and these things, because then it makes the job so much easier. And that implies using a system quite early that supports this, right? And then from our point of view, there's two main things when you are supposed to be listed. Perhaps the most important one, even though we sometimes like to think it's not, is how will the program work for your employees in a listed environment? Because it is different. Because suddenly they may have to become shareholders in a listed environment. You need to have an actual account, a share account, either through a nominee setup or an individual account or something. These things needs to be thought through. Because it's very hard to just say, okay, you 2,000 people, just get yourself a way to hold the shares. It can be easy, but it can also be very, very difficult. So think these thoughts. How will your existing program work in an IPO'd status / should we develop a new program that works better in an IPO status? And then the part that can be very difficult, can be very simple. That's back to kind of the financial reporting thing. Because when you do it based on IFRS, which you have to do when you're listed, bit dependent on the stock exchange and the exact kind of marketplace you list on, but generally, I'd say most companies do it way before as well. But again, now you really have to. Here it is like the kind of the basic way of looking at it. You need to be able to backstate the last 3 years as if you had reported it quarterly or annual, bit dependent, of the costs on your equity incentive programs. So meaning to kind of, if you have been granting options, ESOPs or so, or VSOPs, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, you need to be able to think like, okay, I did grant something here. This was the cost. This was how it was amortized. And based on that, you'll be able to pull out this one report 4 quarters ago saying what was the costs into this period and out of this period. What was the effect on the P&L, the salary cost versus the equity part. This needs to be in place. And that's something that we see that can take quite a lot of time, and it's one of the things that we have focused quite well on. So if you have order in your stuff, we could kind of produce these reports in hours, right? If things are okay. But it can also be a 200,000 euro project with one of the big four if you do that direction. So it's important to at least know about it.
What are some of the main surprises that come out? So because you've worked with them and prepped them, we have heard some stories of unpleasant surprises in their equity schemes.
Yeah. From a company point of view, depending on where you have employees, it may be that you suddenly know that you're owning a lot of social security fees, NIC fees, because you think you just granted it. It's just a piece of paper. That's really not the case, because there are some tax authorities around that kind of are demanding X percentage of the gains that you will have, and this should also be accrued. So you should set aside the money actually during the process. So it's a liability that are there. If you don't know about this, and if the share price since grant, let's say you granted 1 and now it's suddenly 100, which of course is often the case when you do an IPO because you have been on a growth journey. This is something that we've seen sometimes that it's like, oh, is this really, can we make this go away? No, you can't, because this is something that have to be there. I think that's one thing. Another one is the IFRS costs, because as the IFRS costs will eventually affect your result, kind of your EBITDA. It's also something that if you don't think it's anything, because it's just a piece of paper, and then you suddenly see that, oh, it's like this, then it's very, very important to kind of know about it. And not going too much into details, but just one specific, it's like if it's a synthetic program or a VSOP, basically meaning that it's intended to be settled in cash, then these calculations are supposed to be done mark to market, meaning that you have to reevaluate. So if suddenly now the share price is 100 and the strike is 10, then the value that you should have that affects your EBIT should be mark to market, kind of calculated again, and then you have a huge cost. If you had did it at time 0, equity settled, you calculate the fair market value of the option when the share price was 1 and the strike was 1, and then it's like 0.25 versus 99. That can be the difference here in the costs that should be in your accounts when you get in there. And this is also room for surprise for the ones that have done it synthetic. And one of the reasons why we would say that, be a bit careful with synthetic programs, because it can be very volatile on your accounts.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the lockup periods that might be relevant for different levels of the organization once they go to the public market? What do you see there usually? Yeah.
Very common with lockup periods. Depends a bit on the sizes of the programs when you go public. There's a couple of reasons for it. Obviously, one of them is that it can be a lot of shares to be sold in a very short amount of period after you IPO, which is of course a negative thing for the post-IPOing market. Super important to keep that. It's often like this for other shareholders as well. But that's one of the reasons. Another one is, of course, that a bit similar to my example on exercising early in cases that have increased a lot in value. Let's say that you're a company that have done super well, and then you have 700 people with tons of unrealized gain in your program. And then when you IPO, everyone looks at this as your final stage, and they get rich and they sell and they want to go to Aruba and do investments full time and do whatever they want, right? It's not necessarily the best thing for a long-term value creation post IPO for a company. So you also need to think through at least the key contributors, find some ways to make it lucrative to recommit, do something with the program, with the existing setup, reinvestment programs, future matching, something that it's not like, okay, people think they are now getting to the final stage and then they're just kind of getting new handcuffs on. You need to think through how to keep people super motivated going forward as well. And this is super difficult because it can be like millions of euros to all these people, right? And then you suddenly have to think, okay, there's still work to be done here. But this is communication and this is planning and this is like kind of guiding expectations for both the market, investors, and the key contributors, employees. Yeah.
In that direction of paying attention to what's going to re-engage after an IPO, what if the IPO happens and then by the time people want to actually exercise their liquidity, there's a down market? But it's similar, a little bit similar to what's happening right now. Everyone is in a down round or down market. What do you think is a thing that employers can do to re-incentivize people?
Yeah, it's always easier to do equity and to talk the speech of equity incentives in bull markets. But unfortunately / fortunately, it's not always bull markets. So I think this is like one thing in the IPO case. It's also quite relevant just generally in these fluctuations. I think in the IPO markets, it's like there is a risk that they recommit. They could have exercised, and this turns into a negative thing, something that could have been a positive thing. It's not possible, in my mind, to fully mitigate that. It is the case, and people will be disappointed. But there are some tools and some things that you can do, or first of all, start with the communication when you IPO and you recommit. Make sure that people know about this risk. Don't try to glorify it with this will just go up and so. This is super important because employee stock option / equity incentive people that get this, they're not professional investors necessarily. So they need to get this story from you as the professional part, which is the employer. When you're first in the case, when there's a down run, you can work with your owners. And this is very dependent owner by owner. But if you realize here that, okay, now we are in a tough environment, the people that we need in order to get through this stinky period here, that's the ones that now suddenly feel they have lost on their programs. We are very fan on thinking, are there any ways here to commit some extraordinary allocations in these periods to make sure that, and then you can model and calculate something here that, okay, we give something away now, there's a restriction or a vesting on what we give away, let's say 4 years, or conditional on getting back to this level or so. Because here, if you do this the right way, you think, okay, we need some extra gasoline now, but if we manage to kind of pull this way, it should benefit both the ones that give away and the ones that stayed and kind of really got up their sleeves and did the dirty work during this process here. This is difficult, and the investors needs to be a part of it, because investors can say, I've lost, why should I give something to them now as well? But you really need to think ahead, in my mind. Like, where are we now? This is the reality. I don't really care about the others. Everyone's lost now. Do we want to get through it? What do we need to get through it? Again, my personal, but this is always a discussion. There's also another way, is reducing strike prices and reducing the targets and kind of making it easier to the existing programs get more, which is also a way of working about it, because you don't need to issue extra. You just reduces the hurdles, so you're actually back at the money instead of being deep under the water with your programs. Sometimes I find that a bit more difficult to get through, because of, you said at the point of time, this is the strike price, this is what we're going to get, and now we're not reaching it, and then you're just reducing it. I understand the counter arguments quite well from the investors when they kind of feel that this is a bit, I don't get a reduced amount on my investments, so I've lost, why should I on you? So that's why I can sometimes feel like extraordinary parts that only give a good payout if also the investors are back at levels where they're super happy. And here again, you need to think strategy.
And maybe here it's also insightful to bring in a third party that can act like as an outside opinion rather than the company directorship advising on these processes, who are inherently, linked to the program themselves.
Yes, correct. Because I think it's super important to also have the investors' point of view in mind here. It is very easy to be like in a management position in these cases. You know that you got in and you got promised this, and this is the package, and now it's not motivated anymore. Isolated, of course, you should get more or lower your strike price. No doubt about it, right? But there's also others here that have taken an investment and have done things and that have lost. And that's where an independent third party is really, really, really nice, because there are some ways here and some mechanisms here. And if you do that, communicate it well, you manage the expectation during the process, you get everyone on board, you get input, everyone owns the process, you can end up out of something that, if it goes well for everyone. But again, if things just go bad, it go bad for everyone as well. So that's like, yeah.
The corporate marriage counseling.
Definitely, yeah. Definitely.
When it comes to your clients, do they have any repetitive questions that they keep coming back to you with?
Yes, there's quite a few, but I think in the listed environment, the biggest headache is related to worldwide share transfers and money transfers and transparency in these processes. Because it's very, very hard to know, okay, I click the button or I ask to sell, where are my shares, where are my money? Because there's many parts here that needs to be involved. The format needs to be right on the message. There have to be someone standing there opening the door when the shares are being transferred through space and accidentally appears there. So this is like, it's very difficult by nature to do. So this is a very often asked thing on how can we improve our processes related to worldwide shareholding and transactions. In the financial part of it, it's always like, our financial reporting side of it, it's always like, how can we make our costs, what shall I say, beneficial? Because there are some headroom here, right? Okay, you have volatility. That's an important part that comes into play on your costs. High volatility implies higher costs. Here, there's also like, especially if you're unlisted or have limited history as a traded entity, you need to look at peers, right? And when you need to look at peers, there's, of course, you need to do it the right way. You can't do it wrong. But there's also room within the right here to be able to think correctly, to look at things, to analyze, and to kind of make sure that you don't just necessarily jump straight onto full expected lifetimes on eruption and the most volatile companies, because of those are the ones that you like the best. Because if you don't know, you end up with twice the costs, right? So it's often questions around these things. And in the unlisted environment, I think it's very, very often nowadays related to downruns. Because there are many people that have invested on higher levels, joined the last round. It's been hard to kind of deliver on the promised go-to-market strategy that you kind of said in the last round. And then obviously it's a tougher climate to raise again. And then you have to do, let's say, a 70% discount versus the last round. And then all the employees are feeling like, okay, now I don't have more money to invest, right? Because I did everything the last round and everything was pointing upwards. So we get a lot of questions on how to communicate, how to do it. Are there any things we could do of changes? I think that's like 70% of the questions we get on the non-listed environment nowadays.
This brings me to one very tangential, actually, question, but you have a background in equity. We have background in equity. And then whenever we talk to anyone, we say, look, you need to have your house in order. Okay, you need to have a software, you need to have someone dedicated to this. We know that it's important to have the house in order because of the consequences down the line. But these down the line consequences can be 5-10 years away, or IPO or merger or anything like that. And so what we struggle with, even when we're talking to anyone that does equity schemes, is convincing them in this moment in time that if they don't have their house in order now, the consequences are certainly waiting for them 10 years down the line. And for you specifically, because you have listed companies, they live through the pain, so you can actually tell them, look, we have to do this now. This is how it is. But how do you communicate with unlisted companies to convince them you do need this, even though you don't feel the pain, but you need it?
Super question. I think this is extremely difficult, and we've explored a lot around this. I think there's a couple of angles. One of them is that we as vendors, meaning everyone else as vendors as well, need to make sure that it's a no-brainer to change it out. Because if we try to price it in a way in an early stage, which kind of makes it, okay, then I'll just continue with my Excel, just continue with your Excel. Of course, there are some value add here. So it's not only time, there's risk, there's what happens in the future and so. But I think it needs to be in a way where when someone wants to test it, it's like, wow, this was another world. The air here is different. That's the feeling you need to have. Otherwise, we're not doing our job good enough. But they also need to be willing to test that. I think the other angle is not related to the administration part of it, but when we've done some like very, very high level qualitative tests and checks on these things. In a company with 100 people that get equity, our hypothesis is that 80% don't really understand it. If you get questions, they say, and I have some option stuff, and I have some equity things here. But then if you kind of start evaluating your package versus a new offering that you get, but you don't really kind of know what you will lose, when will you get it? Because basically you've signed something and you put it in the drawer and you know there's something in the drawer, but you don't know and you don't remember anything about it. So often that's a better angle, because then you can basically say that if that's the case, honestly, don't use equity incentives, use cash because they understand cash. Don't use it because 80% don't understand it and only the 20%, it's not worth splashing your equity to these people. And then it's easier to think, but I want to share and I want to kind of be a part of it. I want to communicate it. Okay, great. How about trying to make that 80% not understanding it into like 15% not understanding it at least? And that's like kind of often easier because like these incentive management tools, they have an admin side of it, which makes it easier for you as an admin, and they have an participant side of it, which makes it easier for the participant. And of course, if you manage to get in the door with the participant side of it and the communication side of it, the other one just follows. And then you suddenly have order in your stuff as well. So there's a couple of angles that you could use in order to try to get order in your house in this case.
I actually thought this was a perfect concluding thought. I think we got to the point of it all comes down to people receiving it. So if we don't focus on that, it means we have to go step zero and reconsider everything.
Then both you and us should do something else because then cash is better than equity.
Thank you so much, Chris, for talking to us. I think this is incredibly valuable and your insight can be felt. It's
Your expertise shines through the camera for sure.
Oh, it's super to talk to you as well. I think I think what you do is extremely valuable and definitely needed to have people guiding on getting things right from start. Yeah.